The 1963 plane crash took Patsy Cline and the legend Hawkshaw Hawkins. But the ultimate tragedy of that story wasn't a death. It was a birth. 2 months later, his son, Harold Hawkins II, was born from the ashes of that disaster. He was an heir to a heartbreak, destined to live his life in the shadow of the father he would never know. To understand the magnitude of the shadow that Harold Hawkins would inherit, we must first step back in time to an era when Nashville was solidifying its crown as the undisputed capital of country music. The early 1960s were a golden age. The music hadn't yet been fully polished into the slick commercial product it would later become. It still had dirt on its boots. It was raw, honest, and deeply connected to the lives of the people who listened to it. The heart of this universe, its sacred beating center, was the Grand Ole Opry, housed in the Ryman Auditorium, a former tabernacle with perfect acoustics and a palpable sense of history. The Opry was more than just a radio show. It was a family. It was a chaotic, sprawling, fiercely loyal clan of singers, pickers, and comedians who, every Saturday night, would step into a simple circle of wood on the stage and broadcast their souls to the nation. To become a member of the Opry was the ultimate validation. It meant you were a part of something permanent, something real. In this kingdom, there were stars, and then there were royals. The Nashville scene was built around its power couples, partnerships that were as compelling off stage as they were on. Johnny Cash and June Carter would become the most famous, but in the years leading up to 1963, another couple held the admiration of Music City. They were a perfect blend of talent, charisma, and down-to-earth charm. He was the gentle giant with a voice as deep and warm as a summer night. She was the firecracker, a pioneering queen of honky-tonk with a voice that could break your heart and a spirit that could not be broken. Their names were Hawkshaw Hawkins and Shepard. They were country music royalty, living a storybook life at the absolute zenith of their fame, blissfully unaware that their fairy tale was about to come to the most brutal and tragic end imaginable. The man whose ghost would loom so large over his son's life was born Harold Franklin Hawkins in Huntington, West Virginia. From a young age, music was his escape and his calling. He traded 5 trapped rabbits for his first guitar and taught himself to play, his natural talent immediately apparent. He was a big man, even as a boy, and he possessed a voice to match his frame, a rich, resonant baritone that was both powerful and incredibly gentle. After serving in the Army during World War II, he dedicated himself fully to his music. He became known as Hawkshaw, a nickname derived from a comic strip character, and it fit him perfectly. He was an entertainer in the classic mold. On stage, he was a commanding presence, not just because of his height, but because of his effortless charisma. He was known for his flashy, custom-tailored nudie suits, his good humor, and a genuine warmth that radiated from the stage. He wasn't just singing to an audience, he was welcoming them into his world. His career was a slow, steady climb, built on years of hard work on the radio and relentless touring. He finally broke through to national stardom in 1951 with the novelty hit Slow Poke, a song that perfectly captured his easygoing charm. But his true artistic peak came a decade later. After years of being a respected artist, he finally joined the cast of the Grand Ole Opry in 1955, solidifying his place among the genre's elite. In 1962, he signed with a new record label and recorded the song that would become his masterpiece, Lonesome 77203. A heartbreaking ballad of a man calling a disconnected number, the song showcased the incredible depth and emotion of his voice. It was released in early 1963 and began a rapid, unstoppable climb up the charts. At 39 years old, Hawkshaw Hawkins was on the cusp of becoming the biggest star in country music. The woman standing by his side was a legend in her own right. Jean Shepard was not the demure girl singer common in that era. She was a trailblazer, one of the first and most important female solo artists in the history of honky-tonk music. She was tough, talented, and fiercely independent, with a powerful, twangy voice that could convey both heartache and defiance in a single phrase. Hits like "A Dear John Letter" and "Satisfied Mind" had made her a major star long before she met Hawkshaw. She was the perfect match for his gentle nature. He was the calm, steady presence. She was the fiery, outspoken spirit. They met, fell in love, and married in 1960, instantly becoming one of Nashville's most beloved couples. Their home was a happy one, filled with music, laughter, and their young son, Don. By the winter of 1963, their life seemed perfect. Hawkshaw's career was exploding with the success of Lonesome 77203. Jean was a reigning queen of the Opry, and she was pregnant with their second child, a boy they planned to name Harold Franklin Hawkins II. They had everything to live for. On the 3rd of March, 1963, a benefit concert was held in Kansas City for the family of a local disc jockey and performer named Cactus Jack Anglin, who had recently died in a car accident. Such events were common in the close-knit country music world, a family helping its own. A host of Opry stars, including Hawkshaw, Patsy Cline, Cowboy Copas, and Dottie West, flew out to perform. The show was a success, but the weather for the return trip to Nashville was treacherous. A massive storm system was sweeping across the Midwest. Dottie West, feeling a sense of unease, tried to convince Patsy Cline to travel back with her and her husband by car. Patsy, famously impatient with long drives, declined, reportedly saying, "Don't worry about me, Hoss. When it's my time to go, it's my time." Hawkshaw Hawkins had originally booked a commercial flight back to Nashville. He was a family man, and with Jean heavily pregnant at home, he was eager to return. But at the airport, he made a fateful, generous decision. Patsy Cline's manager and the pilot of her small single-engine Piper Comanche, Randy Hughes, offered the remaining seats on the plane to other performers. Cowboy Copas took one. Hawkshaw, seeing an opportunity to get home a little sooner, gave his commercial airline ticket to another performer and took the last seat on Patsy's plane. They took off from Dyersburg, Tennessee, on the evening of March 5th, flying directly into the teeth of a raging storm. They were flying on visual flight rules, in conditions that demanded instrument navigation. It was a recipe for disaster. On the ground in Nashville, the country music community waited anxiously. Jean Shepard, 8 months pregnant, sat by the phone, expecting a call from her husband saying he had landed safely. That call never came. Radio contact was lost. A massive search was launched the next morning. The wreckage was finally spotted from the air in a dense, remote patch of woods just outside of Camden, Tennessee, about 90 miles west of Nashville. There were no survivors. The news hit Nashville like a physical blow. In a single violent moment, the Grand Ole Opry had lost 3 of its brightest stars. The world of country music was plunged into a state of shock and profound grief. At the Hawkins home, a fairy tale had been shattered, replaced by an unimaginable nightmare. Jean Shepard was now a widow. Her son Don was fatherless, and the unborn child in her womb, the boy who was supposed to be the joyful continuation of a family legacy, was now, before he had even entered the world, the heir to a national tragedy. His life story had been written for him in the twisted wreckage of a fallen plane, his first chapter defined not by a birth, but by a death. The echo of that crash would follow him for the rest of his days. And so, the stage was set for one of the most unique and poignant stories in country music. The fairy tale had ended in a fiery, twisted wreck, and the kingdom of Nashville was left in mourning. But from the ashes of that profound loss, a new life was about to begin, a life that would carry the full weight of the tragedy in its very name. This is the story of the boy who was born in that echo, whose first chapter was not a joyful beginning, but the somber continuation of a story that had already reached its heartbreaking conclusion. In the days and weeks following the crash, Nashville was a city shrouded in grief. The Grand Ole Opry, normally a place of joyous, raucous celebration, became a house of mourning. On the first Saturday night after the tragedy, the show went on, as it always did, but the air was heavy with loss. A single spotlight was shown on the empty spaces on stage where Patsy, Cowboy, and Hawkshaw would have stood, a silent, heartbreaking tribute. The music world had lost its stars, but a family had lost its center. For Jean Shepard, the reality was a surreal and brutal nightmare. At 8 months pregnant, she was not only grappling with the sudden violent death of the love of her life, but she was also facing the terrifying prospect of raising 2 sons alone. She was a star, a queen of the Opry, but in that moment she was simply a widow, her world irrevocably shattered. The country music community rallied around her with an outpouring of love and support. Friends brought food, fellow artists offered financial help, and the Opry family wrapped its arms around her. But no amount of kindness could fill the cavernous void left by Hawkshaw's absence. 2 months later, on the 2nd of May, 1963, in a quiet Nashville hospital room, Harold Franklin Hawkins II was born. His birth, which should have been a moment of pure, unadulterated joy, was instead layered with a profound and complex sorrow. He was the living, breathing continuation of a man who was gone forever. He was a symbol of love, but also a symbol of loss. He was Jean's miracle, her reason to keep going, but he was also a constant, painful reminder of the future that had been stolen from them. His first lullabies were the sad songs on the radio. His first family portraits were of a mother holding her newborn son, her eyes still clouded with the shock of fresh grief. He entered a world where his name was already a legend, his story already a tragedy. To say Harold grew up in the shadow of his father is an understatement. He grew up in an echo chamber, a house where the ghost of Hawkshaw Hawkins was the most present member of the family. Jean Shepard, in an incredible act of love and strength, was determined that her sons would know the man she had loved. The house was a living museum to his memory. His platinum records hung on the walls. His custom-made nudie suits, vibrant and sparkling with rhinestones, were carefully preserved in closets. His deep baritone voice was a constant presence, flowing from the speakers of the record player, telling stories of love and loss in a voice his youngest son would never hear in person. Imagine being a young boy, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, learning about your own father not from his embrace or his lessons, but from the crackle of a vinyl record. Imagine hearing his most famous hit, Lonesome 77203, come on the radio, a song about a man desperately trying to connect with a lost love, and understanding in some primal, childlike way that this beautiful, sad voice belonged to a man you were also desperately, impossibly trying to connect with. The song wasn't just a hit. It was a metaphor for Harold's entire existence. His older brother, Don, who was 4 years old when their father died, had at least a few fleeting, fragmented memories of the man. But for Harold, there was nothing. His knowledge was entirely secondhand, a mosaic of stories told by his mother and the extended family of the Grand Ole Opry. The giants of country music were not just names on a record to him, they were uncles and aunts. He grew up backstage at the Ryman, a playground where the legends of the genre would ruffle his hair and tell him stories about the gentle giant who had been his dad. "Your daddy was the kindest man I ever knew," Uncle Roy Acuff might have told him. "He could light up a room with that smile," Aunt Minnie Pearl might have added. These stories, told with love and reverence, were meant to build a bridge to the father he never knew. But in doing so, they also built a myth. The Hawkshaw Hawkins Harold came to know was not a real flawed man of flesh and blood. He was a saint, a hero, a perfect larger-than-life figure, frozen in time at the absolute peak of his fame and goodness. How could any son, let alone one trying to find his own way in the world, ever hope to measure up to a ghost who was perfect? The weight of legacy was a dual-sided burden, because his mother was a formidable legend in her own right. Jean Shepard did not retreat from the world after the tragedy. She did what she had always done. She persevered. She strapped on her guitar, walked back onto the Opry stage, and continued her career. Her music now imbued with a new, raw layer of heartache and resilience that resonated deeply with her audience. She became a symbol of strength for a generation of women. But for Harold, this meant that he was not just the son of a fallen hero. He was also the son of a living, working icon. The pressure was immense. He was royalty on both sides of the family tree, the heir to a kingdom whose history was steeped in both triumph and tragedy. It was almost inevitable that Harold would be drawn to music. It was the language of his family, the air he breathed. With the blood of two country music pioneers flowing through his veins, the pull of the guitar and the song was irresistible. He was a natural talent. He had a strong, clear voice, a gift for melody, and an innate understanding of the storytelling that lies at the heart of country music. He began writing his own songs, forming his first bands with friends, and dreaming of his own place on the Opry stage. This was the beginning of the central conflict of his life. The name Hawkins was both a golden key and a lead weight. It could open doors that were closed to other aspiring musicians. Promoters were curious to see him. Club owners were willing to book him, and audiences were intrigued by the novelty of seeing the son of a legend perform. But the moment he stepped into the spotlight, the weight of expectation would descend. Every note he sang, every chord he strummed was subjected to an impossible comparison. Did his voice have the same warmth and depth as his father's? Did his songs have the same cleverness? Did he have that same easy, magnetic charisma? He wasn't just another young musician trying to find his voice. He was the bearer of a sacred name, and the audience, consciously or not, was judging him not on who he was, but on how well he could channel the ghost of who his father had been. He embarked on a professional music career in the late 1970s and early 1980s, a period when country music was undergoing a massive transformation. The traditional honky-tonk and smooth Nashville sound of his parents' era was giving way to the slick urban cowboy movement, and later the new traditionalist revival. It was a crowded and competitive landscape. Harold played the game, touring the club circuits, honing his craft, and trying to carve out a niche for himself. He was a solid, engaging performer with a deep respect for traditional country music, but major success remained elusive. He never landed the big record deal, never had the breakout hit that would allow him to define himself on his own terms. He was always introduced, and always would be, as the son of the late, great Hawkshaw Hawkins and Grand Ole Opry star Jean Shepard. The introduction was a sign of respect, but it was also a box, a label that kept him firmly tethered to his family's legacy. He was caught in a tragic catch-22. The very thing that gave him his initial opportunity, his name, was the same thing that was preventing him from truly transcending it. Perhaps the most public and poignant moment of his career came in 1993, on the 30th anniversary of his father's death. He participated in a tribute project, an album titled The Hawk, where modern technology was used to create duets between him and his father's original recordings. On one hand, it was a beautiful cathartic act, a son finally getting the chance to sing with the father he never knew. It was his most direct and heartfelt attempt to connect with the ghost, to bridge the silent gap of the years. But on the other hand, it was the ultimate encapsulation of his dilemma. Even at the height of his own artistic expression, he was literally singing in his father's shadow, his voice intertwined with the past, his identity inseparable from the man whose name he carried. The project was a moving tribute, but it was not a breakout moment for Harold as a solo artist. The echo of the past, it seemed, was simply too loud to be outsung. These key events formed the public narrative of Harold's life, a story of a boy growing up in the shadow of a legend, trying to find his own voice in a world that only wanted to hear his father's. But the external facts, the career milestones, and the tribute albums only tell half the story. To truly understand the weight of the burden he carried, we must look beyond the stage and into the quiet, often lonely world of his inner life. It is in the personal stories, the conversations with a ghost, and the profound emotional impact of his unique inheritance that the true depth of his tragedy is revealed. What does it truly mean to miss someone you have never known? It is not the sharp, specific ache of a memory lost, but a dull, constant, phantom pain for a presence that was never there. This was the landscape of Harold Hawkins II's childhood. His life was a series of conversations with a ghost, a one-sided dialogue with a man he knew intimately through stories and songs, but could never, ever touch. The Hawkins home in Nashville was not just a house. It was a shrine, a carefully curated museum of memory. Gene Shepard, in an act of fierce, protective love, ensured that the essence of Hawkshaw Hawkins would never fade. Harold learned to walk on floors where his father had once danced. He played with toys in rooms where his father's deep baritone had once filled the air with laughter. The closets were not filled with ghosts in the frightening sense, but with the vibrant, glittering specters of his nudie suits, each rhinestone and piece of embroidery a testament to a charisma his son could only imagine. For Harold, his father was everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Imagine the surreal experience of a boy sitting on the living room floor, listening to the radio. A familiar voice comes through the speakers, warm, confident, and impossibly sad. It's his father singing Lonesome 77203. For millions of listeners, it's a heartbreaking country classic. For this one small boy, it is the only way he will ever hear his father's voice. It's a message in a bottle from a world he can never reach, a 3-minute connection to a man who existed on the other side of an impenetrable wall of time and tragedy. He wasn't just hearing a song. He was receiving a transmission from a ghost, a father reaching out from beyond the grave through the magic of vinyl and radio waves. This was his inheritance, a collection of beautiful, painful echoes. His older brother, Don, had the small, precious gift of a handful of fragmented memories, the feeling of being lifted up by strong arms, the sound of a real laugh, the scent of aftershave. These were anchors to a real person. Harold had no such anchors. His father was an idea, a legend constructed from the loving testimony of others. Backstage at the Ryman Auditorium, which was his second home, the giants of country music were not distant stars, but his surrogate family. Ernest Tubb, Roy Acuff, Chet Atkins, Minnie Pearl, they all played a role in piecing together the puzzle of the man he was supposed to call Dad. They would tell him stories, always with a warm, sad smile. Your daddy was the tallest man on the Opry stage, and he had a heart to match, one would say. He never met a stranger, another would add. He gave me his spot on a plane once, someone might whisper, their voice catching with the weight of that memory. These stories were gifts, offered with the purest intentions, meant to fill the void. But in their attempt to honor their fallen friend, they also unintentionally completed the mythologizing of him, the Hawkshaw Hawkins. Harold learned about was flawless. He was the perfect husband, the kindest friend, the most charismatic performer. He was a saint frozen in amber at the moment of his greatest triumph. This created an impossible psychological burden. How do you find your own identity when you are the son of a perfect, martyred hero? How do you get angry, as all sons sometimes do with their fathers, at a ghost everyone tells you was a saint? He was robbed not just of a father, but of the chance to know a real, complex, flawed human being. He was left only with the legend, a standard of masculine and artistic perfection that no mortal son could ever hope to achieve. Joan Shepard herself was a figure of almost mythical strength. She never remarried for many years, dedicating herself to raising her two boys and preserving her late husband's legacy. She spoke of Hawkshaw constantly, not just as a star, but as the love of her life. While this was a testament to their profound love, it also reinforced the ghost's presence in every corner of their lives. Harold was living in a world defined by two legends, the sainted memory of his father and the living, breathing resilience of his mother. It was a loving home, but it was also a house heavy with the weight of the past. As he grew older, his search for his father became more active, more conscious. It was a quiet, personal quest to find tangible connections to the man he knew only through ephemera. He would spend hours with his father's old possessions, touching the fretboard of a guitar he had played, running his fingers over the intricate embroidery of a suit he had worn on the Opry stage. These were not just objects, they were relics, the closest he could get to physical contact with the man himself. He sought out people who knew his father not just as a star, but as a man, old bandmates, childhood friends from West Virginia. He was piecing together a portrait, looking for the small human details that the grand legend often obscured. What was his father's favorite food? What made him laugh? What were his fears? These were the questions of a son trying to build a real person out of the mist of a myth. This lifelong search for a connection, for an understanding of the event that shaped his entire existence, was the quiet, driving force of his life. It was a search for answers that could never truly be found, a conversation with a ghost that would never answer back. This profound foundational sense of loss and searching inevitably seeped into his own music, giving his voice a quality of deep, world-weary melancholy. When Harold Hawkins II sang a sad song, it wasn't an act. He was drawing from a well of sorrow that had been dug for him before he was even born. He wasn't just singing about heartbreak. He was a heartbreak, a walking, breathing country song, a life set to the tune of a tragedy he could never escape. In the cold, often brutal calculus of the music industry, talent is only one part of the equation. Timing, luck, image, and that indefinable it factor all play a role. When a child of a superstar fails to achieve the same level of success, the easy explanation is often a simple and cruel one. They just weren't as good. This is the first and most superficial argument surrounding the career of Harold Hawkins II. There is a school of thought that, for all his inherited talent and sincere effort, Harold simply lacked the unique, transcendent quality that turns a musician into a star. His father, Hawkshaw, possessed a rare combination: a once-in-a-generation baritone voice, an imposing physical presence, and an effortless, magnetic charisma. These were gifts of nature, a lightning in a bottle combination that cannot be taught or inherited. The argument goes that while Harold was a competent and often moving performer, his voice, though pleasant, was not as distinctive as his father's. His songwriting, while solid, did not produce the kind of undeniable hit that could launch a major career. In the cutthroat world of Nashville, good is often not good enough. This argument, however, fails to account for the extraordinary and perhaps insurmountable circumstances of his life. This leads to the second, more complex and compelling argument, that Harold Hawkins II's career was not hindered by a lack of talent, but was instead suffocated by the sheer crushing weight of his legacy. He was a victim, not of his limitations, but of his own name. Consider the double-edged sword of his inheritance. The name Hawkins opened doors, certainly. It got him bookings, it got him attention from record labels, it created an initial curiosity in the audience. But it was a gilded cage. From the moment he was introduced on stage, he was not a blank canvas upon which he could paint his own artistic identity. He was a vessel for the public's nostalgia, a living tribute to his sainted father. The audience wasn't coming to discover Harold Hawkins. They were coming to see if they could catch a glimpse of Hawkshaw's ghost. This created an impossible artistic predicament. If he sang his father's songs, he was praised for honoring his legacy, but dismissed as a tribute act, an imitator living in the past. If he sang his own original material, it was inevitably compared to his father's classics, and often found wanting, not necessarily because it was inferior, but simply because it was different. He had no room to grow, to experiment, to fail, and find his own voice because the standard of comparison was always the perfected, mythologized image of his dad. Furthermore, there is the uncomfortable but undeniable truth of his brand. In the eyes of the public, Harold's primary identity was not musician, but son of the plane crash victim. The tragedy was his story, the hook that made him interesting to a wider audience. This is a deeply problematic position for any artist. It meant that his personal grief was, in a sense, a public commodity. While it generated sympathy, it also perpetually defined him by the worst day of his family's life, a day he wasn't even alive to experience. How can you move forward as an artist when your entire public identity is built on looking back at a single catastrophic event? The truth of his career, then, is not a simple matter of talent versus opportunity. It is a complex tapestry of both. It is entirely possible that he did not possess the same unique spark as his father, but it is also undeniable that he was never given a fair chance to find out. The shadow he lived under was so vast, so complete, that it may have blocked out the very sunlight his own career needed to grow. The great unanswerable question of his life is not, why wasn't he as big as his father? But rather, what kind of artist might he have become if he had been born simply as Harold Hawkins and not as the heir to a tragedy? The controversy of his career is that we will never know the answer. This complex and unanswerable question lies at the heart of Harold Hawkins's personal and professional struggles. He was a man caught between the myth of his father and the reality of his own life, a subject of public sympathy and impossible expectations. But beyond the personal pain and the industry arguments, his life tells a larger, more universal story. To find the ultimate meaning of his journey, we must step back and examine the final legacy he created. Not a legacy of hit records, but one of quiet endurance, human dignity, and the profound significance of a life lived honorably in the shadow of a giant. Harold Hawkins. The second story is a crucial part of the ongoing conversation about second-generation artists. In the world of music, for every Jacob Dylan or Rosanne Cash who successfully forges their own path, there are countless others who struggle under the weight of an iconic parent's legacy. Harold's life is a poignant case study in this phenomenon. He represents the immense difficulty of finding one's own voice when the world is only listening for the echo of another's. His journey highlights the psychological complexity of inheriting a name that is simultaneously a blessing and a curse, a key that opens doors and a lock that traps you in a gilded cage. In the small, dedicated community of country music historians and die-hard Opry fans, Harold's story is revered for this very reason. He is not just the son of a star. He is a keeper of a sacred memory. His attempts to connect with his father through music, particularly the duet album, The Hawk, are seen not as commercial endeavors, but as deeply personal acts of remembrance and catharsis. He provides a tangible living link to a pivotal tragic moment in the history of the genre. His ultimate significance, however, may be more universal. His is the story of anyone who has grown up in the shadow of a great loss, anyone who has felt defined by an event they had no control over. It is a story about the quiet, often lonely, search for identity in the face of overwhelming expectations. He reminds us that a life does not have to be a roaring success to be significant. Sometimes the quiet act of enduring, of carrying a heavy burden with grace and dignity, is a legacy in itself. He may not have inherited his father's fame, but he inherited his strength. And in his own quiet way, that is a tribute just as powerful as any hit song. The life of Harold Hawkins II is a ballad that was written in a minor key before he ever had a chance to sing it. He was born into the echo of a tragedy, a son whose first lullaby was the sound of a story of loss. He spent a lifetime reaching for a hand he could never hold, speaking to a ghost who would never answer. He did not achieve the stardom of his legendary parents. He did not sell millions of records. His name is not known to the masses. But to measure his life by those standards is to miss the point entirely. His was not a quest for fame, but a search for self. His legacy is not found on the charts, but in the quiet courage it took to live a life perpetually defined by an absence. He is the heir to a heartbreak, a man who lived his entire life in the shadow of a perfect, martyred hero. But in his quiet endurance, in his sincere efforts to honor a father he never knew, and in his grace in carrying an impossible burden, he created a legacy all his own. Harold Hawkins II may not be the star his father was, but his life is its own kind of powerful, poignant, and unforgettable country song. And perhaps that in the end is the most beautiful tribute of all.